Birding is such a fun activity, and there are so many different ways to do it. You can bird by ear and identify birds by their songs. You can look at the birds and identify them that way. You can watch the birds out your window or as you spend time in your yard. Or you can go on trips where birding can be either a side activity or the main purpose of the trip. It really is an activity that pretty much anyone can do in pretty much any location. So in today's episode, we are talking about birding tools and birding technology that can help you be a better birder and be helpful for birders with any experience level, from those who are just getting started to those with decades of experience. Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to thank all of my supporters on Patreon. Their monthly donations help make Backyard Ecology possible. If you would like to join them, you can do so for less than the cost of a cup of coffee or a meal at your favorite fast food place. I'll have links in the show notes for the Backyard Ecology Patreon page, blog, YouTube channel, and email list. Today we're talking to James Wheat. James is the president of the Kentucky Ornithological Society, and you might remember him from our conversation a few months ago about the Christmas bird count. Hi, James. Welcome to Backyard Ecology. Thank you for talking with us again today.
It's my pleasure. I'm really excited about these topics we're going to cover today.
Oh, yes. And I really enjoyed our last conversation, and our listeners really did too. So I am sure today's conversation is going to be just as much fun because we're going to be talking about a subject that will once again resonate with our listeners who are really interested in birds. But for those who may not have caught the first episode that you were on, can you just remind everyone a little bit about how you got interested in birding?
Sure. When I was a kid, I was a dinosaur kid, like a lot of young people are in the US and probably the world. And the idea that I could identify this species of dinosaur versus that based on field marks or characteristics, I was able to transpose that looking out my window to the birds. And so I was able to, make that leap and have enjoyed it every moment since. And one of the other things that I'm really lucky about that I didn't mention last time is that my dad is an Anheuser-Busch retiree. And back in the day, I lived in Tampa, Florida when Busch Gardens was brand new. And it had this 99-foot in diameter geodesic dome that was about 23 feet tall that was full of all these cool birds. And you could walk around inside it and be up close and personal with scarlet ibis and flamingos and all kinds of cool, exotic, tropical birds that you couldn't see, anywhere else. So that really deepened my appreciation and love for birds and things like that.
Yeah, it's always fun to hear how people got interested in birds or, anything outdoorsy and nature related. And you're a big nature nerd and geek too, I know, and just like I am. So,
and it's almost like it's the gateway activity for a lot of people because it's so accessible. So is gardening and plants and native plants and stuff. But looking out your window, it's right there. The birds are right there. They sing, they call your attention to their beautiful plumage. And so that is a lot of the time the gateway. And then you start seeing fewer of them, or you start thinking in a conservation-minded or wilderness or wildlife or native habitat type contexts, and you're in.
Yes, exactly. And oh my gosh, yeah, we could go down so many rabbit holes here, yes. But we'll try and keep it more tight framed on this.
Yes.
But yeah, when I think about birding, there are two main pieces of equipment that immediately come to my mind. First is binoculars, and the second is some sort of field guide.
Yes.
And so let's start with talking about the first piece first, and those binoculars, because to really be able to see the birds and see some of the details, binoculars come in handy.
Yeah, they really are indispensable in bringing the birds up close and personal. And the good thing is they don't have to be expensive. And there are binoculars for pretty much every budget. Now, there are trade-offs, in the lower end, price end binoculars, you may not be able to see as brightly during the early morning or late evening timeframes, where in low light conditions, rather, whereas the more expensive binoculars have more light gathering capability to sort of stretch your window of opportunity for birding. But the things that I think are most important in choosing binoculars is taking the time to look through as many binoculars as you can. Go to the sporting goods shop, go on bird walks with your local bird club and ask people, can I use your binoculars? Or some of them actually have loaner binoculars, of course, using disinfectant in between, of course, but use as many different types of binoculars as you can so you can understand how they work in the field and et cetera. But also magnification is important. There are some people who think, well, the bigger the magnification,
No.
the better. But the trade-off is in bigger magnification, you get things closer, but the field of view is a lot smaller. And if you don't have steady hands, the shake in your hands or the wind causing it to shake is going to be amplified a little bit. And I think as people look through binoculars more often, they'll get this. I know that sounds a little abstract to say that the handshake kind of is amplified, but the higher the magnification, the more light you need and the more steady hand you need. And that's why with large telephoto lenses or spotting scopes, you have them on tripods. That's why. So magnification, usually people have between, 7 and 8-ish power magnification. The first number in a description of binoculars, 8 by 42, means it's 8 power magnification. 7 by 35 is 7 power magnification. 10 by 50, you get the point. And so, for birding that's close up, 7 to 8 is probably better for most people. The second number in the binoculars, 8 by 42, which looks like 8x42, is the diameter in millimeters of the big end of the barrels of the binocular. And the larger, of course, the more light they gather, but trade-off, the larger, the heavier. And so a lot of people should keep in mind too, that I don't want to carry around a brick to look through. So compactness is an important thing for people who have to carry them around. Finally, as I mentioned, the weight, you can have a neck strap or a harness that fits over your shoulders, which I've found is a lot easier on your neck. Your neck is going to get tired from looking up, especially in the spring, when you're looking up at the tops of the trees for the warblers. The harness takes all that pressure off the back of your neck, but they're a little bit more expensive too. So, but I've sent you a couple of links to 2 different articles about choosing binoculars, and I think those are going to be useful for your audience to sort of look over. Because you're right, it's an important thing to really bring it close. And looking through birds with bright binoculars is just amazing.
Yes.
It's just fantastic to see.
Oh, it is. And yeah, I second your recommendation that you go and get your hands on as many different types of binoculars as you possibly can, because they're going to feel different. They're going to look different to you. And I mean, even now, I have to have my hands on a pair of binoculars before I can decide if I like it and actually look through it to be able to decide. And I've never been able to use 10 power binoculars with any sort of really good skill. I mean, even as a kid, my hands, I'm pretty steady, but my hands, even as a kid, would shake if I tried to hold them. Now, they were heavier. I was younger, so you got all that stuff in there. But birds move a lot, especially warblers. They never sit still. That's one way you tell warblers from vireos. Vireos will sit still. Warblers never sit still.
Right. But the thing about the 10 power is I've spent a lot of my life in Florida, and sea watching, the 10 power are really good because they give you that distance between you and that flock of sea ducks migrating through your field of vision, or gannets or whatever it is that aren't very close. But of course, there's usually a wind as well, so more trade-offs. One other point, just I don't want to characterize the starting point in terms of price, because you can get some on the used market as well, as long as the prisms are aligned so that that they look good out there through the binocular. Buying used ones shouldn't be a problem, but I would say that you're probably looking at least 100, 125 for an entry level model, and of course the higher end is mortgage payment type scope or more.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I didn't want to leave that sort of range unmentioned, but I want to be careful, because again, we want you to be birding, and borrowing binoculars is great. Getting them used is great. Going to pawn shops or other places to find used ones, but they're really indispensable.
So field guides, because now that we can see them with our binoculars, we got to figure out what in the world we're looking at.
Right.
And I know for me, I tend to still go to the books, the field guides, like what I started with and learned on. That's just me. I'm very much still a paper person. I like my paper. I like my books. But books get heavy. You were talking about carrying binoculars and how that can wear on your neck all day, and it does. Mm-hmm. Books, especially if you want to have a bird book and a flower book and a tree book and a butterfly book, because you like everything, then all of a sudden your backpack is much heavier than we want to carry, quite honestly, all day long.
Yes.
And so one of the great things is that now there's apps that are on your phone that you can use that really do a lot of different and exciting things. And you're not carrying anything extra, because let's face it, most of us are going to have our phones with us when we're out there.
Well, another thing that they do, I think one of the biggest advantages of using apps is that if you're carrying around a, say, North American field guide, your choices in a lot of cases are nationwide, and there are over 800 possibilities. So what you're looking at is one of 800 things. But if you use the apps, generally speaking, if you've got signal and the device knows where you are on the planet geographically and what's the date, the time is not as important, but it narrows down and presents you with a narrowed down relevant list of what's likely where you actually are. So that in terms of newer birders learning birds, having that rough sort where you eliminate 85% of the possibilities in the country by geography and date and seasonality, you're really giving yourself an advantage in whether you're preparing for a birding trip, which you can use these apps to do, and getting the list of things that you need to study, the bird song you need to learn, etc. It really is a big advantage over the paper. The other thing to keep in mind too is that as you use both field guides, which I still use, I have all my old field guides. I have my first field guides, my golden guides, with my very first little scribblings about my observations still in them. And so I still use my bird guides at home as reference. I read them, I look through them, I study using them. I always buy the most recent updates when they come out, which they always will. But the app can fit in your pocket. And if you keep updating the app, changes to taxonomy, naming are updated in the app. So if a bird's name changes, or if there's a split or a lump of a species, subsequent updates to your app are right there on your phone. It just naturally updates. So that's another benefit, is that it maintains current taxonomy and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's nice, because I'm one of these people that I'll get my bird book and I'll keep it until I destroy it. And by destroy, I mean really destroy it.
Yeah, you're breaking the spine and having to duct tape duct tape the spine.
Uh-huh. Until the duct tape no longer holds it together. But yeah, so that means that I may be several editions out of date, which means I may not have the same names as what everybody else is currently using. So I always have to remember to go back and look and say, okay, what's the new name? Did they split this? Did they lump it? What's going on now with it?
And I think that keeping up to date is an important thing for me personally. It's not required of everybody. I know that there's an expense buying new field guides. Usually the apps, if you download the app, sometimes there are some that you have to pay for. The ones we're going to talk about today, you don't. But you just refresh them periodically. If on your phone, your apps can be set to update automagically, and it really does. It's nice to help keep up. So
yeah, that's a great benefit.
But the other thing that I want to mention about the apps, since we're talking about generally speaking, anytime my phone starts to act a little funny, like delays or things don't look the way that they should, I want to put out there that turning off and back on again or rebooting the phone is an important first step. From the standpoint of if it's not working the way you want it to, just turn it off, turn it back on again, try again. It really does fix a lot of those wonky, funny little problems. And so I would make sure that if people are starting to use the apps that we're talking about out in the field, it may not be convenient to turn it off and back on again while you're out in the field, but I do that every day or two. I'll switch it off and back on again just to clear out the junk. So yeah, that's sort of like a general advice with a laptop as well.
Yes, always good advice there. But okay, so let's talk about some of these apps more specifically. And what's your favorite one for, especially let's say a new birder getting started?
Okay, so I think that Merlin is great for new birders for a lot of reasons. Aside from what we've already mentioned about it narrowing down the possibilities, there is a section called Start Bird ID on the Merlin app. It's a free app. And what it'll do is it'll walk you through the major thinking points of identifying a bird. The first two of where are you and when are you? So where are you located? And if your location services are turned on your mobile phone, meaning your phone is connected so that geographically your GPS works, the app knows where you are on the planet. That's an important thing to know. And when is it? Is it spring? Is it fall? It goes by date, but so do the apps. They work by what's the date. So, for example, in Kentucky today, when I switch on, the app is going to default to today, right? So, but that doesn't mean that I can't say, "Hey, I'm going on vacation, and I want to know what I can see, where I'm going to be, when I'm going to be there." We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the first couple of questions again: where and when? Where are you, and what time of year is it? The next thing it'll ask you is, how big is this bird? And so anybody can sort of estimate, is the bird about the size of a sparrow or a robin or a crow or a goose, and a couple in-betweens, right? And that way the app sort of starts, okay, narrowing down things. And then the next thing is, what are the major colors of this bird? Is it mostly an all-brown bird? Is it a black and white bird? In the spring in the central part of the U.S. or the southern part, if it's bright orange and black, well, there's only a few things that are going to be bright orange and black, and we start thinking about our orioles and stuff. Could be robins. So that really walks a new birder through the major thinking points. Where am I? What season is it? How big is it? And what colors? And that really gets you a good distance to identifying. And what happens then is the app will present a short list of possibilities that you can scroll through and say, oh, that's it, by the way it looks. If you want to find out more information, you can tap on a button, an information button, and it'll It'll give a written description, and it'll allow you access to some audio clips of what the bird sounds like. So you could be right there in the field comparing, the vocalization that you're hearing from the mouth of the bird you're watching, along with some verified audio clips of that species. And so that to me is really important for new birders in terms of visually identifying birds and having the app sort of walk you through that decision-making process, that flow chart, if you will, of identification. And then at that point, you can sort of say, hey, yeah, that's my bird. And it'll sort of save your observation on your phone, on your account, so that you'll know that you've seen it before. And you can tap into what you've seen before, in other places in the app.
And you mentioned that it could give you audio clips.
Yes.
For the birds after you've kind of narrowed it down by sight. Can you do it the reverse way? So say I'm hearing a bird that I don't know what it is, and I'm trying to figure out what it is, but I can't find it anywhere. I don't even know what I'm looking for.
Yes. And the sound ID is exactly that. You tap on the sound ID icon, and then you're presented with a large green icon in the middle of your phone that looks like a desk microphone, kind of like the one that Johnny Carson used to use back in the day. And you tap it, and it starts recording the birds in your area. And, the detection of sound is going to depend on a lot of different things. Is it windy? Is there a lot of ambient noise with traffic around? So you can't expect miracles, right? If the bird is, a quarter mile away, and if your phone is an old phone where the microphone technology isn't as good as the newer species of phones, then, don't be so hard on these apps, because hardware and ambient noise, distance to the bird are all relevant factors into whether the app and your location settings being turned on are all going to factor into how well the app figures out what it is that you're hearing. But here's the way it works. You switch it on, and you can watch a spectrogram slide by from right to left, which is a visual representation of the sound, where the higher up on the spectrogram, the higher the pitch of the call, and the other axis is time. So it's scrolling by in real time, and if you hear a cardinal doing its song, you're going to be able to see what the cardinal song looks like. And as it identifies birds, it'll start showing up on a list below the spectrogram. Northern cardinal, northern mockingbird, mourning dove are going to start showing up on a list below as the app is identifying what you're hearing. And so if it lists something that you haven't seen, it can call your attention to it. Although I turn on the app, but I don't stare at it because I want to be looking for the birds. But if I see that it has called a white-crowned sparrow, for example, and I haven't seen one, I'll certainly want to start looking around to try to find them. So it's a lot of fun interacting with it, because it can sort of tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, there's a red-shouldered hawk calling in the distance. And I'm like, oh, I didn't hear that. Oh, there it is. So that is a gigantic benefit to learning birdsong too. And once you're done, you can tap the stop button and it'll save the recording. And if you want to go back and hear the species, let's say the white-crowned sparrow on that recording sample that we just talked about, if I tap on white-crowned sparrow on that list, it's going to fast forward me to the spot on my recording where it first detected the white-crowned sparrow. Not every time, but just the first time. So you can sort of tap it, it'll locate that spot on the recording, you press play, and there it is. So in addition, each of the listings down below, as I mentioned before, you can find out a description, some other audio recordings that Merlin has stored so you can compare your recording with the recordings here. Also a range map. Where's this bird expected to be at what time of year? So yeah, it's really a big thing. I also do some volunteer work with Merlin on the audio piece at the moment. And I think that there's a real interesting thing that not everybody knows about Merlin, is that when the team is training the machine learning to identify bird calls as this species or that species. It's not doing it by the sound. It's actually doing it by the spectrograph. So it's looking at the visual signature that the bird call or bird song or bill snaps or drumming of woodpeckers or whatever sound it is. And it's looking at how does it match the database of similarly identified species. So the machine learning is working on visual stuff. And this is the same way, by the way, that another piece of Merlin is the photo ID, where if you have a photo, you could take a photo in the field or have a photo on your phone. You can bring it up, you zoom in on the photograph so that it fills this box on your screen, and then you tap identify, and it, in a very similar way, goes through its database of images of the species and matches your bird to what's in the database, just like it does what the signature sound looks like on a spectrograph in its database the same way. So very interesting. I'm learning a lot about machine learning that I didn't know. But you don't have to know any of that stuff. All you have to know is that the more photographs that are submitted to eBird and the more audio files that are attached, the better the resolution is going to be for identifying species. Again, assuming that the app knows where you were located and when you're doing the work. So all of that stuff, to me, it puts in your hand so many resources to narrow down your possibilities. And what I know about from a learning perspective, as a learning and development professional, is as people feel more competent at identifying birds by sight and sound, aided by these tools and reference materials, they're gonna feel more confident, and they're gonna be able to call out birds in a group setting more comfortably than they would otherwise be. And as people gain competence, their confidence will grow, and I think their enjoyment of it will grow. And you got to get people started on the right foot. And this app, Merlin, I think, is a great way to get started, because I learned like you. I learned in the analog, golden guides and the early Peterson guides and whatnot, which was great, which worked back in the day. But man, I just wish I had some of these tools for when I was young.
Oh, yeah. And I think going along with what you said too, the more competent you feel, the more confidence you get, the more you enjoy it, the more you learn about it then.
Yes.
And it just increases your competence and you're confident, and it just becomes this never-ending loop.
Yes. And as you learn more and you have in your mind more visual and audio clues as to identify what species, what happens when you hear something that isn't one of those things? Well, you know faster that it isn't that. It's not a robin. Doesn't sound like a robin. And so, yeah, and then it sort of compounds, and the joy just gets deeper and deeper, I think. I know that it can be intimidating, at first when you first start birding, because of all those choices. And that's exactly why I think these apps that we're talking about today take out a large part of that factor that might make people not want to go on a bird walk or not want to speak up when they're on a bird walk. And I really hope that people are comfortable doing so, because bird walks are a great way to A, try other people's binoculars, and B, be around people who might know more than you, which is always a good thing, but people who also know about as much as you, where you're not going to feel like you're the only one who doesn't know that, well, that's a blue grosbeak song, for example. I think the technology is really facilitating a generation of birders whose learning curve is going to be a lot shorter than mine.
Yes, definitely. I agree with that. All right. With Merlin, you said it kind of steps you through and all that good stuff. If it gives you an answer, is that definitely the answer? Or it could be something else? Or what if your answer isn't on there and you really, really, really think that it's something else? What's the confirmation piece? or how accurate is Merlin with its identifications?
So good question. And one of the things that I hear from the Merlin team a lot is that, and eBird people, that it's a frustration sometimes that identification by Merlin really should be the start of the investigation, not the end of the road. That is to say, if Merlin says, that was an eastern towhee calling, and you don't know that it's an eastern towhee calling, or you didn't hear it, but it shows up on the recording, I just want to emphasize that let that be the beginning of the investigation, not the end, because Merlin is getting better. It isn't perfect. It's getting better every week. But if, for example, if Merlin picks up on something and you didn't hear it and you didn't see it, you shouldn't really add it to your checklist, because it was the machine, the device that detected the bird and identified it, not you. But if you did see it and can confirm that that's what it is because you saw it and heard it and you know what it is, that's different, right? So what I mean is sometimes if there's a rare bird or an unusual bird, the eBird notes will say identified by Merlin. And generally speaking, that's not a convincing argument at all. Even though Merlin is a good tool, it's not evidence that you have observed this bird. And so I guess I would just admonish people to consider a Merlin ID as the start of the investigation. Okay, well, Merlin picked up this. I didn't see it or hear it. Let me keep looking for it and keep listening for it and do that extra work to confirm the identification.
And I mean, we're talking about Merlin as an app, and it is an app and something that you can definitely use on your phone. But you can also go back and use a desktop version of it too, if you want to do it at home, correct? And look stuff up, or even just figure out what that bird is you're seeing outside your window while you're sitting on your laptop.
So not Merlin. Merlin is
Okay.
the app only. There's one other aspect of Merlin I think is interesting to talk about, and that is you can explore different birds. So you can set the filters for a location and a date. Let's say you're planning on going to Georgia, Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia. You can set it for the date and time that you're going to be in that location, and it'll generate a list of potential species. And you can do that on your phone. And what'll show up there is the same information that we showed before. There'll be a thumbnail of the picture of the bird. There will be what's called a bar chart. And a bar chart is a graphical representation of a year, January, February, March, all the way through December. And then little bars that are wider for something that's more frequent, or time frame when they're more frequently observed in that location at that date, and narrower when they're not, or absent when they're not there. So you can see in one little bar the seasonality of a bird. When does it start showing up in this area? When does it go away to breed or to winter? And you have access to the sounds and, again, the description and other photographs. So that's the last piece of the Merlin app, but that is one that is app only, as opposed to eBird, which eBird you can do a lot of stuff on the browser or desktop or laptop version compared to the app.
So let's talk about eBird then. And what is it compared to what Merlin is?
So eBird doesn't have the steps to walk you through the decision-making process for identification, which is why I mentioned that Merlin is geared more toward new birders, although experienced birders definitely use it. I use it all the time. But eBird is really just a checklist generation tool. So whenever I go birding, whether I'm here at home or I'm out birding, I'll open up the app and I'll start to create a checklist. And it assumes that my location will be turned on. It just starts the checklist at the date and time stamp. And what I do is, as I observe birds, I will tap in, there's a blue jay. I'll type in one blue jay, or, there's a couple common grackles. Okay. And then later on, if you get another blue jay, you just type in one blue jay and it adds it to the one that you've already added. So you don't need to do the math in your head. You just enter your bird observations, what you hear, what you see as you go along. It also tracks your distance. So it tracks your time and distance based on the timestamp of when your checklist starts to the time you finish it, and how far you travel, how far you walk or paddle or ride or etc. And so it assumes that you're identifying what you see and hear, and it's just keeping track of it. And at the end of your birding, when you get back to your vehicle, you stop, and it sort of says, okay, well, now you have to sort of confirm that how many observers were there. Oh, I was birding with my friend, so let me make sure that I add him or her to that checklist to share it with that person, because you were there together, the same distance and the same time, and you're not going to have two different lists. Although if that person doesn't see everything you see, they can edit out the stuff that they didn't see, or if they see something or hear something you didn't, they can add it to their checklist. So once you share it, they're two separate checklists, but having that shared checklist indicates to researchers, for example, that this was not a solo person walking in the woods and there's a companion checklist. It matters to the researchers. So,
which is an important point with eBird, is that it is something that individuals can use for their own personal use, but it's also something that scientists and researchers are using too. So it has this dual purpose, and it's very rich and very valuable from that standpoint. And I'm sure if we don't talk about that right now and get off on that tangent, we're going to at some point in time.
Yes. So, but back to the point, when you stop your checklist, you have to confirm how many observers, how long were you birding, and because sometimes if you get into a conversation when you get back into the car and you don't switch off your checklist, oops, you might want to trim the minutes, and then the distance is also tracked along the way. But I won't go too detailed here. But one of the important things to know about the distance in eBird, if you're on a trail where you start at your vehicle, you go out to the end of the trail and you turn around and you come back on the same trail, you want to adjust to just one of those trips. You want to eliminate the backtracking. So if I'm on a 1 mile trail and I come back and eBird says, well, you've gone 2 miles, I'll trim it back to 1 mile, because that's the geography that was birded. And on the way back, I'll be careful not to double count the same thing. So if I get one blue-headed vireo, for example, on the way out, and I get one blue-headed vireo on the way back, I'll often assume that it's the same bird and I won't add another one. But if I get a black-crowned night heron on the way back that I didn't see on the way there, oh yeah, I'll add it. So there is a free course on eBird called eBird Essentials that the link will be in the show notes, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. I absolutely recommend, I request every new eBird person to please watch that course. And it'll tell you all about these things and give you practical examples. And the better people use eBird, the better the data that gets submitted. And when I talk about data quality, I care about data quality professionally, but also from birds and Christmas bird counts, as well as eBirding, because they're a volunteer review team. And, if you are entering a bunch of crazy things, they're going to be flagged, which means they're noted as either being rare or unusual in appearance, or how many of them you're reporting. And then some person has to go in and manually take a look at your checklist and maybe send you an email to ask you to clarify, or did you get photos, or whatever the case is. And so the better your data going in, the easier these volunteers' workload will be. And so what do I mean by that? So if you see something that is rare, that isn't on the default checklist, that appears, we certainly want you to report it. One of the important things to do, though, is to describe what the bird looks like. because eBird will say, hey, that's rare for this area at this time. Please add some notes saying, well, the bird was feeding on the trail and then a dog came by and it flushed up into the woods and then I didn't see it again, might be true, but it isn't going to help a reviewer who didn't see the bird believe that you did, right? So it's, what did the bird look like? What was it doing? What did it sound like? What were the colors? What was the size? Any description of the bird is absolutely key. The other thing that it might flag is an unusual number. So if you see a large number of a certain bird that we really only expect there to be a few, you might have to say, I carefully counted these one by one and I double checked it. My colleagues double checked it. And so here's how we decided that that was the right number to use, as opposed to, well, there was just a gigantic flock of starlings and we just ballparked it. But even that's important information if you just ballparked. How did you determine how many birds were there? So that was my appeal, to have people spend a moment, describe the bird, just if it's flagged for being rare, and that'll have like a little R, rare. And then if it has an exclamation point in a triangle, that means the number is unexpected. So tell us how you figured out how you determine that number. And doing those things will increase the data quality for the researchers, but it'll also lessen your neighbors who are the eBird reviewers, your friends and neighbors. It'll reduce their workload, which is an important thing because it's volunteer stuff, and we want to be merciful.
Yes. And do the best you can to make sure that you get as accurate of an idea as you can. I mean, describe it when you see it. And if you've got a lot of birds or something that gets flagged as rare or unusual, either because of the species and the time or because of the number, be sure to be able to document it as accurately as possible. I know here in Kentucky, every time there's a pine siskin eruption, we always get flagged. Right. Everybody gets flagged for that because there's too many for what should be here in a normal year. This just isn't a normal year at that time.
Yeah, and I'll also note that the best birders in the state have to add notes to their eBird records too. So don't feel like it's the app is forcing me to do this. It's for everybody. It is a data quality measure that ensures that people who didn't see the bird can feel comfortable saying, okay, I'll confirm that. Your photograph that you've uploaded to the checklist after the fact, or your audio clip from Merlin that you uploaded and attached to the checklist after the fact, are two additional ways you can document, and wonderful ways, because a lot of the time a photograph or an audio clip are diagnostic, and that doesn't exempt you from writing a description, although a lot of people will simply write photo attached. If the photo is good, then the notes are going to be less important. To me, though, I like to add those notes just as a disciplinary thing for myself, that I want to be able to see it and know what it is and be able to say what it is, not just rely on the technology of a camera. That's just me. I can't sort of project the way I am on other people, fortunately for other people. But I think that, nowadays, people are, with better cameras and things, and having Merlin so you can have the audio clip that you can add, really makes the documentation a lot more robust than it ever has been. These tools really make every person a lot more a lot faster able to identify and have good checklists. So I love using these. I use them all the time.
So really, Merlin is the digital equivalent of a field guide. And then eBird is the digital version of the checklists that many of us used to keep.
Yes, your notebook. Although back in the day when I first started birding, eBird has made me regret not being as fastidious with document. I have field notes from years and years ago and they have the date and the location and the species list, but they don't always say 6, of this species and 18 of that species and 200 of the other. Some of my photographs can bear those numbers out, but not always my field notes. eBird sort of prompted me to start doing, and Christmas bird counts really prompted me to start documenting all that data for every single time that I go birding. And again, that may be intimidating to some people, but if you make a habit of it, documenting that stuff, it is important, and it makes more robust data for science to use, so that they can calculate things like detectability. How many birds can you detect at this location walking, against how many can you detect if you're riding a bike, because they can compare those sorts of things.
And it also helps to improve, like with the Merlin app, where you were saying you can go in and you can see how likely a specific species is to be in the location you're getting ready to go on vacation at that time of year.
Right.
That data is being pulled a lot from like eBird accounts.
Yes, Merlin is standing on the shoulders of eBird in terms of the data set behind it. Yes.
And going with that and being able to check on your regionality and how common this bird is in this area that I'm going on vacation to. How do you do that extra research? Can I just put in that I'm going to Hawaii and that's going to automatically show me everything there is? Or when I get there, I just like pull up my app and I'm ready to go?
That is an interesting point. And what eBird and Merlin have done is they've created data sets called PACS, P-A-C-K-S, and they're regional. So if I'm in the Eastern US, I've got the Eastern US PACS. If I have a trip to Hawaii, there's a place you can go in your settings where you can load a geographical pack for, say, Hawaii. That's going to be significantly different. And now, when you go to those places, if you haven't done it and you switch on your phone, it will prompt you. It'll say, hey, you're in a different place. Do you need to load this pack? Here's what we recommend. And it'll have a suggested pack for you. So, as long as you know what your packs are, and eBird and Merlin don't do them exactly the same, but if you look into your settings, you will see the packs that you have loaded onto your phone, and any recommended ones. So usually it'll recommend, states peripheral to the one you're in case you want to do some birding across into the other state. So it'll prompt you to do it, to update your packs. But, you also would need to do that if you're at home planning that Hawaii trip. You would load the Hawaii pack and then do your research into what birds are going to be expected when I'm going to be over in the islands. That's not exactly true for the eBird desktop app, but we're really not talking about that at the moment. So you certainly doing your research on your laptop or desktop is going to be a little bit different. But yeah, packs are an important thing to know about, and they'll update the packs from a Merlin standpoint as the Merlin team continues to do their work preparing audio files to train the system, in a more fine-grained fashion, how to identify birds. They'll update the packs with the more granular, more higher resolution type of data. And those things will automatically update, again, if you have your phone set to automatically update. But using those tools to research where you're going to go allows you to look at the list, then you consult your field guides, your paper field guides, as you and I love to do, the tactile experience of a book, the smell of a book, in order to prepare for the trip, so that when you're out in the field, that preparation and homework that you've done pays dividends, because you don't have to have your nose in your app when you're out in the field in Hawaii, because you've done your homework. You have an idea of what the common things might sound like or look like. And that's the benefit of these tools, being able to narrow down your homework assignment, if you will. And everybody likes less homework.
Yes. And that's really good information to know too, because I know I would be very likely to just go and then pull up my phone and think that everything's going to be there. And it's not necessarily. And I don't want to stop and have to deal with phone stuff and app stuff if I'm off on a vacation somewhere.
And especially if you're off on a vacation in a place that doesn't have signal and it takes 20 minutes to update the phone. Don't put yourself in that situation. Plan ahead, make sure that you're prepared, and these apps will save you effort, time, and really bring the birds closer to you sooner. Because again, that's having to, I feel horrible when I'm looking at a bird, and of course, that's what I would recommend. If you're looking at something you don't know what it is, get as much eye and ear time on the bird in the field as possible. If you have someone else with you, here's another thing that I recommend. Most phones have an audio recording application I'm not talking about Merlin, I'm just talking about a voice record, a memo. Turn it on someone else's phone and sort of describe what you're seeing into this thing so that you have contemporaneous voice notes on your observation, which can enhance, make or break your identification if you can't figure it out while you're out in the field. So that's always a good option. We're talking technology here. That's always a good tool to use to help you.
Yes. And sure helps with the memory when you've got two people sitting there, binoculars up, going, okay, it's got this, it's got that. Does it have a wing bar? Does it have an eye ring? Or what? Wait, what's going on? Oh, are we even on the same bird here? Because those are all conversations that happen out in the field.
Right. And this is a hands-free supplement to your record keeping, that you don't have to have a pencil or a pen in your hand and a notebook and fumbling with that while you're trying to get eyes on the bird, especially if it's one of those things where if you drop your binoculars from the bird, you're going to have to spend a couple of minutes trying to re-find it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, all of these things are new tools that really are, the people who are starting birding now, you are lucky, and don't take these things for granted, and really appreciate and learn them, because they are going to enhance your joy.
Like you said before, it's definitely going to put you way ahead on the learning curve and help you learn a lot faster than either of us did without them.
Yeah, and that's not just like the old guy, grumbling about how everybody's got it better.
Mm-mm.
It's just the technology can facilitate such information, and targeted, focused information that I use it. Whenever I'm planning on trips, I do it too, and it's great because it's wonderful to hear a bird that you've never heard before, but you know what it is because you've done your homework. And you don't have to stare at your phone, and you don't have to listen to 14 different audio clips while you're standing in the field trying to figure out what that thing is. Yeah, I definitely am a big advocate for this stuff. So,
which is why I wanted to have you come on and talk about it. So we've been talking about trips and doing research and looking up what's there. Can these apps help us figure out, or are there apps that can help us figure out where to go? Because Hawaii or the Okefenokee Swamp or wherever we're talking about going are really big places.
yes.
But where do I go to see the birds, or my best chance to see the birds?
So there is one piece of the eBird app called Explore, which you can set for a certain diameter circle of where you are. So if you switch on, you can see all the eBird hotspots that are within X number of miles of where you're standing. So that can help you find other birding places. And they've got pins in a map. You're looking at a map. The red ones are ones that have been visited recently. The blue ones are ones that haven't been visited recently. And you can also set what recently means, in the last week, in the last 14 days, in the last month, so that it can help you see. And then there's a button where you can tap what birds are likely in that place, and et cetera. So you can use something like that. So if you're on a birding trip where you're just improvising, you finished up at one spot and you're like, I don't feel like going home yet, what else is nearby? You can use that Explore piece in eBird to find some local nearby places that might have some cool stuff there. But if you're doing research and you want to know a little bit more about a birding hotspot, there is a website called Birding Hotspots. Now, Birding Hotspots is a website that's designed to give you information that eBird isn't designed to give you. And a guy, Ken Ostermiller, up in Ohio, started this long time ago with Ohio Hotspots, where he had a website where you had a bunch of information about visiting. There are tips for birding this particular spot, like parking, restrooms, and other sorts of things. What birds of interest can be seen here. Other things about this location, it's a Nature Conservancy property, or it's WMA, so make sure you're aware that during hunting season, you might have requirements of vests or not going there during hunting season. Notable trails and maps you can link. There are maps attached there. So if you're going to be in an area, then if these hot spots, if they're fleshed out where that kind of information is there, you'll know a whole lot more about the lay of the land than you would just using eBird to identify what are the major hotspots in an area that have gotten the most checklists and the most species. Now, this Birding Hotspots website also brings in eBird data. It's one click away. So if you go to a hotspot where one of the regional editors, I'm one for Kentucky, and what I do is I'll fill in all this information for hotspots that I know that I've been to, and add photographs and Google Street View maps to show you the entrance and all those things, so that people who are coming from near and far, if they've never been to this spot and it's not an easy place to find, they can actually see a picture of the entrance area. They can see a picture of what the habitats look like. So it's sort of a crowdsourced project. And Ken brought along a web guy. His name is Adam Jackson. And they've really designed it so that anybody can make suggestions to any hotspot. And so I would hope that your listeners will take a look. It's in 17 states. Not all states have this yet. But if you have a couple favorite hotspots, about the parking, about the restrooms, about the trails, whether they're paved or not, you can go in and suggest by filling in these fields that I just listed, tips for birding and et cetera. And it'll go to one of these regional editors who will look it over and approve it so that it will be filled out so that others can benefit from your firsthand experience visiting these places. And so that's what it can add. It adds this sort of on the ground, lay of the land kind of information that eBird isn't set up to do. Now, Ken and his team are partnering with eBird. They're not affiliated, but at some point it's hoped that maybe there's a link in eBird so that when I'm doing my work in eBird and I want to find out more about that stuff, say I'm a person who uses a wheelchair and I want to know, are there paved trails there? I might be able to find that out by using the Birding Hotspots website because it has some of that information. But also things like, during this time of year, the trails are often muddy, so you might want to bring along your wellies or your waterproof boots. All that kind of on the ground detail that our wonderful friends, local friends who know the spots can add. Another example that comes to mind is there are some spots where you really want to make sure that you behave in a certain way because not behaving in a certain way might cause the landowner, the property owner, to retract permission for birders to use the property. There are some intermittent ponds and some other areas in, say, Kentucky, that if we screw it up by trespassing on other people's property, causing neighbors to squabble with neighbors, we might lose our access. And so we really want to make sure we have information so birders can know. Because if I'm coming to go birding in Arizona, and I don't know this particular thing, and I park my car, and then some landowner gets mad at me and says, all right, that's it, then I've blown it for a lot of people. And we want to make sure that we can provide information. Now, in eBird, sometimes there's the hotspot name, and then in parentheses, there's restricted access or some other notes, stay away from the horses, so that people can understand, okay, I have to be careful at this spot. That's the reason, because some of these are private property, and the grace of the landowner has given us the chance to bird these spots and see cool birds, that it's a privilege, not a right. And we have to treat it as such. And that's the beauty of this website, is you can have photographs of the trailheads, where trails diverge if they're not well marked, because sometimes private property, the trails aren't marked well, but you can add photographs and other, signposts, milestones, information that can help people on the ground with planning their trips and making sure they don't get lost, because there's maps on this website.
That's a really valuable and useful tool, because there's so many times when it's like, I want to go someplace, and it's someplace I've never been before. I mean, it may be 20 minutes from the house. It doesn't even have to be a far away trip, just close by. And it's like, I just don't know enough about it to know what I'm getting myself into. And it's nice to know, what's my parking situation like? What's the trails like? And like you said, all those basic information.
Yeah. And are there restrooms is a very legit concern. So these are the logistical things that I think can be available. Now, that's why it's a plea, if you will, for people to take a look at this website. And if your state is listed on there, every eBird hotspot has a page, because of the way Adam set it up and Ken set it up. And if yours is blank, your favorite spot is blank, please take a few minutes. It doesn't have to be a full tourist guide to that site, but just any information, any links to a website that talks about it or that has maps of it. Please make the suggestions, and the local reviewer will take a look and update it again to benefit our fellow birders who will want to come visit the site. So it really is a plea for a crowdsource, if you will, of local birding information, so that people can really enjoy your birds. You want people to enjoy the birds in your area.
And that's something that anybody can do too. I mean, even if you're a new birder and you're just getting started into birds and you feel like you really can't contribute much of anything because you don't know enough yet. But on something like that, you can contribute a lot, because anybody can say, there's a nice, good gravel parking lot here, and there's pit toilets that are well maintained, and the signage is really well marked. And everybody can say that, or there's not.
Yeah, this is a WMA. This is the trail is an old 2-track that doesn't get mowed. So, in spring and summer, it might be overgrown. And if you're going to do it, make sure you're wearing, tick protection. Mm-hmm. Those are legit things that you're not going to find in eBird.
No.
But this is a fantastic resource that we really need our friends and family to add their localized information to. So, please take a look at the website. Look at your local patch. You can zoom to it by location, like your city and state, or click on a map, click on your county, zoom into certain hotspots. They'll all have a little pin. Click on it. You can open up that page and suggest an edit, and upload pictures that you've taken of the area, even if they're just scenic. This is what the habitat looks like, because that will inspire people to come visit. Beautiful stuff. Like the geology of a spot might be something that will draw your spouse or your loved one who might not be a birder. I want to go see that. Great. Well, I'll go see birds. I can click on the eBird list right from that page and see, what birds have been seen there. So it's wonderful to do research, but it is in development. There's a lot of our spots in Kentucky that need attention. And Ken's been working on this for a long time in Ohio. So if you want to see what it can be, check out some of the Ohio work that Ken and his team have been doing for years and years. And we in Kentucky and in California, Arizona, and all the 17 other places, and then some, there's a contact thing too, where if you're like my friends and family in Florida who want to do this, Florida's not on there yet. you can contact Ken and Adam and start doing it for your state as well.
So, yeah, this has been really, really wonderful conversation. And thanks so much for telling us about the apps and sharing some of that with us, because I think they'll be very helpful for many of our listeners. But is there anything else that you want to share with us real quick before we wrap up? Or how do people get in touch with you if they've got questions?
Okay, yeah, I am happy to first of all, thank you very much. It's always a joy to talk to you about these things because you've got such a sort of a sympathetic energy to the topics that we talk about that you pick for your podcast. And it's exciting to talk about these things to share with people that I hope can help them on their path in birding. My email address is james.a.wheat@gmail.com. It'll be in the show notes. And I'm certainly happy to help. If anyone has questions or comments, I think that these are great tools to use and would encourage people to explore them on their phones and on the web and enhance their birding experiences.
And of course, there'll also be a link to the Kentucky Ornithological Society there for people who want to join in on some of the bird walks and some of the fun things going on in Kentucky as far as birding goes. And then I'm sure if you Google whatever your state is, Ornithological Society, most states have them. And so even if you're not in Kentucky, you can still join in the fun for your own state.
Yes. Yeah. Your local bird groups will have bird walks that you can join in and get out there in the field, because that really is where the rubber hits the road. When you're out in the field looking at birds through your binoculars, the more time you do that, the better you're going to get at it.
Yes. And having other people around you really, really helps, because then you can get the help with the identification of what in the world is that thing? And what am I even supposed to be looking at to figure out what it is? Because if you're just getting started, you don't know necessarily to look for wing bars or eye rings, or what in the world is a wing bar and eye ring.
Well, one other thing that you'll get in the field too is getting somebody on a bird, which is an art in itself, describing where some bird is. Is it on the horizon? Is it on the field? Is it in a tree in front of you? And where in the tree is it? Is it at the top? Is it at the right? Is it the left?
Yeah, just saying it's the little blue-green bird that's bouncing around in the top of the trees.
In the green tree.
Yes, in the green tree, when there's like 10 of them in front of you, does not help. And yeah. I say that knowing full well that I have said that to people, and I still say that to people sometimes, because that's what comes out.
Yes, yeah. But having that birding experience with a group will sharpen your language around helping other people get on to birds and directing people to where something is. So, yeah, that experience in the field is great. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of your audience out in the field too.
Well, thanks again, and I hope you have a great day.
You too. Thank you very much, Shannon. Take care.
Yep, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I really appreciate James taking the time to talk with us again. He is such a wealth of information when it comes to birding. I love how enthusiastic he is about birding and how passionate he is about helping others get into birding too. He shared some really good information with us, and I'll have links to all the resources that we talked about, plus a few others in the show notes. Also, Anthony and I are working on a project that we're very excited about. We're hoping to make an announcement about it very soon, possibly within the next couple of weeks. If you want to be among the first to hear about it and perhaps participate in our beta trial, then be sure to subscribe to our Backyard Ecology emails. You can do so at www.backyardecology.net/subscribe. That'll keep you up to date with everything going on in the backyard ecology world. And when you sign up for our emails, you'll also be able to download a free ebook that explains why our familiar garden zones really don't mean anything when it comes to gardening with native plants. That's just our way of saying thank you for your interest in backyard ecology. And until next week, I encourage you to take some time to enjoy the nature in your own yard and community.